Thank you for checking out We Heart Therapy, whether you're watching on YouTube or wherever your podcasts are found. Make sure you check out my book, Using Relentless Empathy in the Therapeutic Relationship, Connecting with Challenging and Difficult Clients, available on Amazon. It was endorsed by Dr. Sue Johnson, pioneer of wonderful EFT, which is the model of counseling I use. So make sure that you check it out. If you're interested in coming to some fabulous CE retreats, I host some. You can find it on wehearttherapy.com. Retreats for therapists that are fun. I have Therapist Summer Camp where we engage in cultural experiences and fun and earn our CEs at the same time. If you're a therapist, you're interested in working with me for EFT supervision, getting some consultations, or maybe you're just a regular couple off the street and you might be interested in working with me as your therapist. I offer couples intensives and individual therapy. You can find me on my websites, drbelle.com or lasvegasmarriagecounseling.com. Would love to have you here in Las Vegas and we can do some really good work together or have some fun doing an EFT training or earning some CEs wherever that might be. Make sure you check it out. And if you haven't hit subscribe for my podcast, make sure you do so now because more episodes are on the way. Welcome, everybody. You're watching We Heart Therapy, the special series EFT Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Belle, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified EFT supervisor and therapist here in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm super excited to welcome to our show. So we have Robin Williams Blake. He is a registered psychotherapist in Canada. He's also a certified EFT trainer, supervisor therapist. He's the director of the Toronto Center for EFT. He also teaches at one of the universities outside of Toronto. And he teaches a lot of workshops in EFT. He does externships. He teaches on EFT for individuals. And if you guys don't know this about Robin, he also takes amazingly beautiful photos. So if you follow him on social media, be prepared to have your breath taken away because his photos are amazing. And so we're excited to have Robin here with us today. And we are going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about view of self. And because this comes up a lot. And if you are an experienced EFT therapist, you know we use this phrase a lot. We work with it all throughout the process. And from listening to the feedback, there seems to be maybe some confusion lately about how we work with view of self differently in stage 1 versus stage 2, how it might be different when we're working with just an individual with EFT therapy versus a couple. So we're going to dive into that today. So thanks, Robin, first and foremost, for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So great to be on your show.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you finally. Finally, I talked you into it.
Yes, we've been working to do this for a while, for sure.
Yes. So if you could maybe start us off, when we use that term, view of self, what are we really kind of talking about here in EFT?
Okay, so can we just go to where the terms came from in the first place?
Absolutely.
And everything starts with John Bowlby, right, in attachment. So for EFT, I mean, it's our grounding science here. He coined the term, the concepts, working models, internal working models of self and other in, I think it was like 1969 in his trilogy, the first volume of his trilogy. He started to talk about internal working models of self and other. And he called them working models because he felt that they were open for revision, right? Which makes sense. I mean, this is why we do this work. If they were fixed, then what would we be doing in this work, right? And so they are open for revision, and they do need to have the right circumstances for them to be revised. So he called them working models of self and other. And then I think it was Kim Bartholomew in 1990 that started to develop his work, and she started to call them views of self and views of other. And so we use them interchangeably, right, in our work. I tend to think of them as some of other EFTers, that when we're talking about the science, we use working models of self and other. And then when we're talking about more clinical examples and from the client's point of view, we start to sort of drop in and talk about them as view of self and view of other. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
I love that. And first, it sounds really exciting that Bowlby has a trilogy. I've never heard anyone describe it in that way. Sounds like a really exciting action movie, a trilogy of attachment.
Well, they're this big, novels this big, right? They're
Yes.
very dense, but yeah, in 1969 and up into the 80s, he was working on these 3 volumes of his science, basically, his theory.
Yeah. I kind of think his son sort of condensed all those into a really phenomenal book that was published posthumously. And it's called The Making and Breaking of Affectional Bonds. And I love it because it's a
Yeah.
short, easy read, but it really like condenses all of that into the nuggets, and it's pretty hardcore and amazing. And I love that, you're saying that view of self is, that internal working model of ourselves and others in the world. And we call it working, as you're saying, is it's not a stuck fixed place. And I think for a long time therapists thought even like attachment styles were sort of fixed. And again, if things couldn't be changed, what are we doing here as a therapist? We're in the business of change, right? And we do know that these can be changed, rehabilitated, reconstructed, rebuilt. And I love what you said, though, sort of the right set of circumstances have to occur. And can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Sure. So they're not fixed, and they are, we can move them, shift them. The right circumstances, I'm thinking about couples work here when I'm thinking about the right circumstances. When couples come into EFCT
Mhm.
for therapy, if they're like the rest of us, they've created a negative pattern. We all know about the stage 1 being de-escalation. So we need to get them de-escalated. They've created this pattern that makes it pretty impossible for people to shift and change, right? So you used to talk about folks coming in, and it's like they're standing at the edge of the cliff, right? And their toes are hanging off, and nobody's going to be able to shift or change when they're facing, maybe feeling like they're about to be pushed, right? They're in survival mode only. And so those are not the right circumstances for change in
Right.
relationship.
Think
And
of
so
survival mode as like red brain state.
yes, exactly, exactly. They're just in survival mode. So this is why this model that we're using, Sue's model, is laid out brilliantly in a sense across all 3 modalities. We need de-escalation. We need folks to start to feel safe with us, the therapists, but also in couples therapy with each other. And it's with that de-escalation that we can then sort of move them into stage 2 and start to work on these models of self and other, or views of self and other. So
Yeah.
did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. And so we're talking about, when individuals and we know when we're working with couples, they're more like they're getting triggered by each other. Like this threatening stimulus can come up in session through that dynamic versus an individual's coming in by themselves. Maybe the threatening stimulus, which could be another person, a relationship, whatever, is outside of the room. So they're maybe not getting triggered as easily in session, having that red brain state. But either way, you're saying, when humans are in survival mode, and we know from the brain science on attachment that they get
Yes.
the amygdala hijack, it puts their brain into red brain state. They can't learn new information. And the science behind that is that prefrontal cortex floods with peptides and shuts down. So literally, you can't you don't have access to that part of the brain. So we have to soothe the amygdala to turn off that red alert to get the
Yes.
brain back into green brain state so that new information can be learned. So as you're saying is for those pieces to be reconstructed, we're going to help people reconstruct those in the green brain state is where that gets reconstructed. But we do have to walk through that red brain state first.
Yeah, yeah, we have to validate that because we, have all sorts of sayings that Suisms, as I call them, and the protection becomes someone's prison in a sense, and they have perfectly good reasons to do what it is that they're doing, right? At this
Juncture.
juncture. Yeah. And so we actually meet them in that reactive state and make sense of it for them. And this helps them sort of lower their force fields with us and then start to do it with each other, which is what we need.
And even if they're just an individual coming in, every human has these patterns and of trying to cope and survive under threat. And even when an individual is coming in, they might be talking about something relational outside of the room, or maybe even outside their romantic partnership. They may not even be in a romantic partnership, but you're still looking across those relational systems. And view of self, again, is how we see ourselves, aka this is also self-esteem. And,
Yeah.
so can you talk about why working with view of self is important in human beings?
So, well, yes, because they're walking around. It gets back to this protection becomes their prison, right? And then it's going to stay there, their prison, unless there is some change, there is some revision. They're walking around with this idea that the other is not safe, the other possibly doesn't can't be trusted, isn't safe, is going to reject me, is going to harm me in some way, possibly emotionally at least. And then they're walking around with their negative view of self, which is, maybe it's my fault, maybe I don't deserve anything more than this, what I'm experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
and so we need to get at that and organize it for help people organize their thoughts around that and their feelings around that, and
Mm-hmm.
get them to see that they're in a cycle internally with themselves and also with the world. In couples therapy, it's with the partner. With individuals, it might be we start to get a sense of the landscape of the client's world, right? We want to enter that world and we want to see the cast of characters in the client's world, the ones that helped their growth and the ones that hindered their growth.
Mm-hmm.
This is a growth model. EFT is a growth model of personality development. So we need to get in there and see how their view of self and view of other was formed in those early days and how it's playing out today.
Yeah, so if we could break that down a little bit more. So,
Sure.
how view of self was formed in early life. So we know, their first relationships with other humans, their caregiver, usually parents, but sometimes it's grandparents or somebody else. But their caregiver is the first human being that they have a relationship with. And then it's their whatever their internal family structure is. And then the second you would say is like their peer group. And how the quality of those relationships really sets like the template for how they learn to see others as either trustable or not reliable. Do they have hidden agendas, or do I believe that they will be there for me? And through that relationship also formulates how we feel about ourselves, right? Our
Yes.
view of self is socially constructed. And it's so
Yes.
interesting when therapists try to isolate just the self-esteem and work on it outside the system. And it's like, well, how do you do that? Because it's socially constructed. If I could just give myself some affirmations, they wouldn't be in therapy because there's plenty of apps and YouTube videos and such. It's just not so simple. So through our first and primary experiences with others is how we learn to see ourselves, right? Because when people aren't
Yes.
there for us when we're young, we don't tend to blame them. We tend to blame ourselves. right?
Yes.
But then
Yeah.
when we,
So
yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, when we become adults and we become a bit more protected, sometimes it's easier to focus on others and try to blame others than to look at ourselves, because underneath is a red brain state in our own heart, right? Where if I'm not, if my parents were never there for me, it's first people who are biologically hardwired to love me, be there for me, if they're not even there for me,
Yes.
or they're not consistently there for me, I might get the message that I don't matter, I'm not lovable. If even my own parents don't love me, then what does that say about me?
Yes.
And that's a red brain state, right?
Yeah.
Anything that
Yeah.
threatens our ability to be connected, which could be our own unworthiness, our own unlovability, our own perceived flaws, will activate that survival alarm, right?
Yeah. What you said there, I wrote just a couple of things down. So Sue used to talk about this. You can't take the fish out of the water and study the fish, right? You have to study the fish in the water. And so I like to share, teach that the self is constantly constructed, deconstructed, and constructed again in relationship with others, which is what you're saying here, right? So this change and this shifting is always possible as long as we're in relationship with others. And I like to think of it as I mean, they're internal representations of the other that we've, injected, in a sense, ingested. And I like to think of it as a movie, right? It's the movie that we keep playing in our brains. It's almost like a TikTok reel, right? It just keeps playing itself in our minds. This is what's going to happen if you reach out to somebody else. Danger, danger. And until we sort of revise these with in therapy, then this is going to continually be our prison, as Sue taught us.
Yeah. So we're sort of trying to look at how people, what their view of self and others are and how it got constructed. And you're saying that's important to how they show up in the world today, whether they're in a romantic partnership or not, right? I can hear some, in my mind comes some therapists maybe thought saying, well, what if they're not in a relationship? What if they don't have a caregiving system? Well, that's important, right? How did they
Yes.
become so cut off from other relationships, right? We are relational beings. That's how we're wired. So if you're
Yes.
saying in a world full of billions of people that they have nobody, how did this come to be that they're so cut off, right?
Right. Right.
What's that view of self? Because that view of self and view of other, correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, but that sort of that affects sort of how we filter the information, make sense of the experiences, whether we're interpreting our sense of danger as this person's trusted, and am I being accepted, right? If maybe, let's say somebody doesn't text me quickly, right? I might, if I have a negative view of self, I might be likely to go into a slight bit of panic that, oh, maybe I'm not really liked, maybe I'm not good enough in their eyes, and that's why, there might be that pause. It just affects the way that we interpret our interactions with others around us.
Yeah.
If the boss skips us over for, you know, a promotion, you know, if we have a negative view of self, we might be likely to focus inward and kind of get stuck on sort of, where the negative self-esteem comes up and the thoughts and that whole loop about, how we're not good enough. And, so we're, and then what do we do with that? What's our protection? Maybe try to work harder, become a perfectionist, become a people pleaser. Do we cut off relationship with other people and not even try for it because it feels with certainty from our prior experiences that we're never going to be loved or accepted, and that would be too painful, so it's just easier to be alone and convince ourselves we just don't really like people.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And get stuck in that place.
Yeah.
Right. So attachment science gives us we have an attachment view of health, right? And one of the attachment views of health is this felt sense of security with self and other. And so when we meet individuals, we're starting to listen for this, right? We're starting to listen to, are they at home with themselves, or is there a kind of a non-accepting part of them, a judging part of them that judges themselves? It's difficult for us as human beings to come home to others until we've come home to ourselves, right? So we're really helping clients get in touch with those emotions that sort of keep them stuck. We want them to be able to accept their own experience, which to some extent is building their narrative, their whole developmental narrative, and getting them to see some of the chapters that might not be they might be out of their awareness at this point, right?
Mhm.
And so we want to bring that back in so they have this coherent sense of self, as well as accepting their interdependency. A lot of people are walking around thinking, well, I don't need anybody, right? But what we know about that is that Sue has taught us that isolation is dangerous for us as human beings. And
Mhm.
to stay in that place is going to be hard for us as human beings.
Yeah, detrimental to our health. Tons of science on that. And
Yeah.
And, sometimes maybe we have somebody who might think positively, but about themselves, but they're sort of stuck in this place where maybe their partner doesn't think, or, somebody, maybe a best friend or a sibling or parent, whoever it is, someone they're in an important relationship with maybe doesn't hold that view. And so we might have to access view of self, we say, through the eyes of other. Yeah, like you might see yourself in this positive way, but through your partner's eyes or your mother's eyes or your boss's eyes, whatever, you know, something they see you differently, right? Differently
Yes.
how you want to see yourself.
Yes.
And we're
Yeah.
looking
So
for,
this is, go ahead.
I was going to say, we're looking for the alarm bells, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that those alarm bells are what's going to come up in the couples therapy in stage one, right? In the fight, in the conversation, whether it be a protest polka or find the bad guy, these are, we're going to look at our partner's face. And in that negative dance, we're going to see what they think of us, right? We're going to see the reflection, right? And this is going to be difficult for us, right? And it's going to cause us to kind of fight even more, right? At times, right? Which drives the pattern that we need people to see in stage one of EFCT.
And even for individuals, right? If we're
Yes.
seeing individuals, we're sort of looking, I say like that view of self and others, like their attachment MO, right? And it tells us, their protections will start to make sense, their coping strategies when we understand how they see self and other, right? If I'm coming in alone, but I'm talking about, going through a painful divorce and we're going to go for that view of self because it's going to impact how they show up again, maybe throughout that marriage, maybe through the end, maybe through their their healing journey, trying to move forward. What are the wounds? How does that come back to how we feel about ourselves and our, again, it comes back to those doors of attachment of, am I lovable? Am I wanted? Do I matter? Right? Can I be loved? And so we're constantly looking for this because that'll affect what we do, right? How
Yes.
we show up in the world, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So,
And we want to organize. Sorry, go ahead.
nope, you go ahead.
We want to organize this in stage one of EFIT, right? We want to come alongside of the client. We want to enter their phenomenological world. We want to get a sense of their cultural context that's shaped them. Context shapes attachment and also emotion regulation strategies. So we want to get a sense of that and see how their internal cycle, how they sort of take care of themselves in these difficult moments, like the rejection of a divorce, right? How are they coping with that? Who do they turn to? Or do they have resources, right? We want to get a sense of their risk, their resilience, and their resources. In the last couple of years, Sue was really talking about motivation and misery, right? And how the misery can come in and kind of flatten the motivation for people to keep moving forward. So, with a case like with a client who has just gone through a difficult time like that, we'll want to see that motivation, get a sense of what motivates them today, and what also kind of squashes that motivation and stops them from sort of moving forward.
Yeah. And what kind of comes to mind is that sort of old adage, misery loves company. And I think in EFT, we would say, no, emotion demands connection.
Yes. Nice. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
Misery is like an umbrella of emotion, right? Pain,
yes.
suffering, disconnection, heartache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So getting a sense of how isolated the client is in the very beginning in stage one, as we're building our alliance with them, which is so important, for them to trust us so that they can start to explore their difficult. Bowlby called them the frightened, alien, and unacceptable emotional experiences, right? So we want them to be able to sort of get to that in stage two, be able to share their frightened, alien, and unacceptable, what's really difficult for them. But we need to create this alliance with them in stage one first.
Yeah. So kind of, I think what I hear you saying, Robin, you tell me if I'm getting this right. In stage one, building that alliance is really trying to establish ourselves as a therapist as a secure base, right?
Yes.
We know when there's a secure base, safe haven, then we can explore the world and ourselves in it. And again, if we've gone through a lot of frightened, alien, and foreign experiences that have never worked out, nobody's ever shown up for us. And also depending on our age can matter because it may indicate how long somebody has had practice coping and protecting themselves or had these messages be reinforcing, right? If you're 50 years old and you've had these messages reinforced for 50
Yes.
years versus somebody who's 19, they're still painful and detrimental, but it's just the more ingrained and stuck it can become. But really helping, so when they come in, right? They may not necessarily trust it, which may seem weird because, hey, they're paying you as a therapist for your
Yes.
advice. Why obviously they're already trusting us. And in some ways, yes, that is correct. At the same time, it's like somebody invites you into their home and you're not immediately just going to walk into their bedroom and go right for their underwear drawer, right? And start snooping
Right.
around, right? For the
Right.
intimates and the delicates, right? We're going to move through the other parts of the house, right? First. And so we are being invited into these sacred experiences and these places that they protect that they don't want anybody to know about. And so developing that rapport, that alliance, that secure base safe haven really helps them know I can open up this part of myself that I've always been taught maybe is unlovable and trust that you're not going to look at me the same. Even though I might be paying
Yeah.
you, I also know you're human and I don't want to get the same response from you that I've gotten from everyone else. And unfortunately, therapy hasn't always been a safe experience for others, for
For
some,
some. Yeah.
you know. And so that's why it's so important for us to establish that rapport.
Yeah. Well, in EFIT, the hopefully the therapist becomes a valuable resource. We start looking at the landscape to see if there's other resources for this individual, and we start to look for or build the stronger, wiser other, the part of them that brought them to therapy in the first place, the part of them that keeps them putting one foot in front of the other, the
Mhm.
part of them that actually believes that they are worthy of something different, right? We try to grow that part of them so that it can be a resource for them in stage one, and then to do this deeper work in stage two.
Yeah, so it sounds so if we can kind of expand on that, how we work with view of self differently in stage one versus stage two, because some folks sort of have this idea that, oh, we only work with view of self in stage two, which really isn't true. We just work with them differently. So whether we're working with couples or individuals, right? And again, like a coupleship is also made up of two individuals. So we've always thought in EFT, if you can work with couples, you can work with individuals because you're still working with.
Yeah.
So, so it sounds like in stage one, a lot of it is sort of being able to identify, organize, and make sense out of what their view of self and view of other is. Sort of map out, organize, make very clear how that affects their pattern of coping, of moving forward and the blocks.
Yeah, so that how they take care of themselves in those moments. We might notice difficult emotions just showing up somatically, right? The turning away, the looking down. We start to track that so that we can get a sense of what happens for them internally when this emotional process happens, takes over. In a sense, this is what we want to slow down, but we don't want to slow it. We don't want to, for shame, for example, we don't want to go deeply into shame in stage one until we have that alliance and we have the client resourced, right? We tend to, I think it was Leanne Campbell that said, maybe she got it from somewhere else. Maybe it's an original, but we name it in stage one, and then we tame it in stage two, right?
Mm,
So we'll want to track. So what happens for you when these feelings come over you, right? How do you take care of yourself in that moment?
mm,
And typically speaking, what we see is that people either need to dial up emotion or dial it down. And if they dial it down and move away, then what they actually need to help with the difficult emotion, if it is connection, then that's not accessible to them, right? As they move away from others, so they're left with the difficult emotion, and then it can grow in that place of isolation. And so that's
mm,
what's difficult. And that's what we want to do in stage one: get to know it, shape it for them, shape it with them,
mm,
and reflect it back and start to change that narrative
mm.
that is, it must be me, to it makes sense that I've endured this and I've protected myself in this way, given what I've experienced.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you're saying shape in stage one, it's like by identifying it, organizing it, we're sort of building the narrative of the context that exists as to how it was formed and how it functions currently, and creating, organizing really is creating a cohesive narrative about
Narrative, yeah.
what's happened and why. And we're sort of plugging it back into that pattern, making it clear, like, okay, so when this happens, and here's some of the emotions, and we may say things like, what are the messages you get about yourself when this happens, or how do you see yourself? Um, and sometimes in early stage one, like you said, some clients don't want to readily go there and talk about themselves. Like I have a few clients who their protection was they were in the chronic caregiving position, and so they will very easily talk about others and focus away. And yet, when it comes time to focus on them, they have a really hard time staying there, and they
Yes.
want to keep refocusing back out on others and not focusing on themselves.
Yes. Yeah. So it reminds me of a client I had who kept bringing in important others in her world, but saying to me that I can't talk about them yet.
Mhm.
Right. And so let's, for example, one was dad, right? So I can't talk about my relationship with my dad yet. So I would just say, well, dad's here now, and we'll just put him over here. And when you feel safe enough to speak about dad and your relationship with dad and whatever happened with you and dad, then we can talk about it. But I really just, supported her bringing in the idea of dad, and allowing me to see that there was a difficult area there that she would eventually need to talk about. And she did that with a couple of other people in her life, right?
Yeah. And it's so important too. I'm thinking even in couples therapy, like if, I've had clients where a parent wasn't very responsive, and so they struggled to feel loved and accepted by that parent. And ironically, they get into relationships and marriages, and their partner unknowingly takes on or resembles maybe some of the behaviors that they sort of become triggers, like, oh no, you're sort of just like that parent that didn't respond to me, and here I am not feeling loved and I don't matter, and because I may see you not responding to me in the same way that mom didn't respond to me or the way that dad did, and that becomes
Mm-hmm.
scary. And so, again, it's never just in the past, right?
Yeah.
It's showing up here in the present, and understanding that, right? Also, I find in couples therapy can help give meaningful context for the partner, because they usually, I've never had anyone say yes, but they don't want to be triggering their partner, and they don't often know why they are. And having this context helps it make sense for them. It opens more empathy and compassion. And they're like, oh, okay, now I see it, right? It starts to make sense. So it's a helpful context, not just for their partner, the one who does have this frame, but also for the partner who might be unknowingly or inadvertently triggering some of those protections,
Yes.
and sort of triggering into that messaging system, right? Of
Yeah.
this is how I
Yeah.
was taught to see myself.
Yeah. And so in couples therapy, we have to be very careful when someone has such possibly a difficult past, right? That we don't bring that in too soon in front of the partner, especially if the partner is looking for an out, right? To not be blamed for what happens in the relationship. So we need to be careful with that. We don't want their partner to point a finger
Right.
at that.
Like, oh no, it's not me. Like, I'm not doing anything. This is your mother. Yeah, no,
Yes. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course. And I've found, when there's that safety and rapport, it's like, oh, okay, now I see what I'm doing. It makes more sense how what I'm doing
Yes.
is triggering my partner, and maybe I can adjust and do some things differently so that because I don't want to be my partner's mom. And oftentimes that
Yes. Yes.
get used in their cycle, like, you're just like my mother, or you're just like my father, or my ex, or this, and those are some of the places where these messaging can sort of pop up. And I kind of find they're really at the core, like the trigger on the outside. Remember, and I use this metaphor a lot, like a trigger only has its power because it has to be near something combustible, right? If you hold
Yes.
a flame out in the air by itself, it's not going to blow up anything
Yes.
because it's not near something combustible. But so an outside stimulus may be neutral until it speaks to something in here that's kind of lying in wait. And then you just bring that into contact and it ignites this. This helps us know, right? And that theme kind of transcends. It may be situationally a bunch of different triggers, but usually when you can get down to this core messaging, view, self view of others, it's like, oh, here comes that message again, right? And that's where that
Yes.
internal combustion starts to happen.
Well,
What?
it's like when I hear you say that, it's like finding the raw spot in Hold Me Tight, right? It's
Yeah.
like the original trigger or moment, right? That becomes the trigger today,
Mhm.
right? That original sort of misattunement, let's say,
Mhm.
finding that out, so that we can see today how what
Mhm.
gets set off in the individual. We
Yes.
are present process, right,
Mhm.
focused, and we're process consultants. And so we want to bring in that process. But today is more important because we can't change the past. We can only change reactions to the past. Yeah.
Right, right. So we're helping them know how that past lives in the present, right? We don't necessarily dwell on the past, but we
Yeah.
helps us inform the present. And oh, like many roads come back to the same place, right? When we're mapping the cycles, the patterns, whether individual, couples, or family, and we may see lots of triggers, but when we can get back to that view of self, view of other, right? That's the core of the red brain state, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
am I loved? Am I accepted? Do I matter? Right? I want to matter to you. I want to matter to others. I want to matter to my boss. I want to be seen as capable, competent, well able, worthy, all these internal messagings. And then if I get something happens externally that triggers that alarm bell that says maybe I'm not, right? And we are more likely to get triggered if we had a past that have taught us that that's more likely like who we are is unlovable, or like we don't actually believe that as EFT therapists that you're not worthy or incapable.
No, of course not.
It's that's what your attachment prior experiences have taught you to believe about yourself, and that lives in the present, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
so we use the tango in stage two to get at these attachment fears
mm,
so that they can be opened up. I'm remembering Sue saying that in order for the for change to happen, the vulnerable view of self needs to be up and running in the session.
mm,
Right? What does that mean? It means the client talking about that from a deeply emotional place, right? Vulnerable place,
mm,
talking about not feeling worthy, talking about not feeling lovable, talking about feeling like maybe I am too much. That's how we get it up and running in the session so that they can share it with their partner in
mm,
couples work and have the partner who is hopefully more engaged be able to turn to them and say, I don't see you as too much. Right?
mm,
That's the new information.
mhm.
And of course, the what I call the pesky little protector, which is the amygdala, needs to hear those messages several times.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I think I hear you saying, Robin, you tell me if I'm off. So in stage one, we're identifying the view of self and how it operates at the center of this pattern. And, we're kind of plugging it back into the pattern, which really gives meaningful life context to the
Mm-hmm.
emotions we feel, the triggers, even the protective strategies, and how they maybe try to feel better, take care of themselves in that moment using these various protective strategies. But we're not in a place where we're really opening up, having them talk about, I feel like I'm too much from a vulnerable place. And stage one is very defended, and they generally avoid kind of being super open and vulnerable about that place. Though we may be able to talk about it, name it explicitly. In stage two, you're saying, here's where we go into view of self. And usually I find in stage two, this view of self, now that we've help them identify these patterns that keep them stuck and the role of that view of self, view of other in that. And there's some stability. Now we're kind of seeing it as what gets in the way of reaching for love, for comfort, for support, acceptance from others, from the good stuff. And so we may go into this view of self, or we will go into view of self. It's really the heart of step five in stage
Yes.
two is
Mm-hmm.
now I can go into this place, even though it's still super vulnerable and scary to say, I really am afraid that I'm just not lovable. And it's not going to come from this reactive, really defended, highly heated kind of, I'm talking about it, but still avoiding talking about it place. It's like, okay, I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to put this most vulnerable part of me out there and take a risk and trust that I'm going to get a good response, that you'll show me, you'll show up for my amygdala in this way and help me know that I am in fact lovable, worthy, capable, deserving of love. Am I getting that right?
Yes, well said. Well said. I was thinking about taking a withdrawer, for example, in couples therapy in stage one too deeply into their not feeling good enough, not feeling like a failure, and having their spouse not be able to receive it and say something like, this is what they always do, right? This is what they always do. It always becomes about them. and their past, and this is what I'm tired of. Right?
Mhm.
It's a pretty good indication that that you might have gone too deep with the withdrawer too quickly, for example, just as an example.
Yeah, and that other partner might not be able to hold that space either without getting sort of reactive, like, oh, it's always about them and how they feel, and they're never with me. So I'm not able to even have empathy for how you might be really hurting deep
Yes.
at this core.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we need that we need that de-escalation. We need that curiosity.
Mhm.
We need them both to sort of lower their force field and see each other as not just one dimensional.
Mhm.
The pursuer often seeing their withdrawing partner as just withdrawing and not caring. We need them to see that their partner is has all these facets to them that make sense of who they are, and we need the withdrawer to see their pursuing partner not just critical and blaming, but also dimensional, multidimensional, that they've got something. There's a more emotional music going on for the clients
Yeah. So I
and
love
each other.
what you're saying, Robin, is we're really seeing the role that it plays in the activation and the escalation in stage one and highlighting that. And, I think even part of the escalation can be owning, maybe this is part of um, you know, even as we transition to step five, is yes, I do have this part of me that feels unlovable and I see, or unworthy, not good enough. And I see how that has gotten in the way of me really being with you. Because when I hear that I've done
Yes,
you wrong, that I've disappointed you, that part of me gets triggered and I close up and I go away. And, then you come to me with your hurt and I can see how, again, I make it about me, right? I'm not able to see that your hurt is
yes,
you feeling unloved because I'm stuck in myself, that your upset or anger is about me being bad or not good enough in some way.
yeah. It really is the art of this model, right? Making sure, I mean, and Sue has laid it out brilliantly for us, is making sure that as you go along, you're building the windows of tolerances for both partners.
Mhm.
Right? There are tolerances to trust not only the therapist, the therapy, but also each other, and not getting too far ahead of them in that sort of expanding trust is really important as we move from stage to stage. And once again, I always share that there isn't this fine line, right? We know this a thin black line in between stage one and stage two that we just jump over at some point, and
Right.
we're in stage two. There's this wide gray area. And
Mhm.
sometimes we're like moving back and forth with, certainly with a couple, as we move into the deeper emotion.
Yeah, sort of some overlap there, some feathering in. And I know we always talk about dancing in EFT, that, really the art of being human and being in relationship with others is dancing with others. And so in any dance class, you're taking steps forward, maybe steps to the side, maybe steps back, right? And it's all a normal part of the dance. So it's okay, we'll be kind to you too as a therapist. Certainly, I'm an EFT supervisor and I still accidentally push people out of that window of tolerance.
Yes,
So it
yes,
happens. We don't always know. We do the best we can to track and try not to be ahead. And again, it's a process for us. If we do get ahead, we just course correct and bring ourselves back, attune, and come back.
yeah, yeah. It's perfect, perfectly said. We can be too eager sometimes, and we've got to be careful. We've got such a brilliant model behind us, right? That we want to show people and have them believe in, and we have to go slow sometimes with our folks, with our clients.
And even there, that's where therapist view of self can get triggered. If
Yes,
I'm out ahead of my clients, if they get upset at me or they push back or they don't go where I want to go, then it could be me. I'm a terrible therapist. I'm inadequate. I shouldn't do EFT. Maybe I need to go back to CBT, or I should just not be a therapist at all and become a realtor, you know. So even us as the therapist, our view of self can be a part of the dance as we're walking alongside other people and their suffering and their painful view of self. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the task portion of the alliance is so important, right? We know that from the research. And so if a client isn't following you, then it's possible it's a sign of a rupture in the alliance, or you're trying to just go too fast with a client that needs you to go slower.
And it's okay to rupture, right? Relationships, as I think Ryan Reyna, the other EFT trainer, says this: all relationships are the art of rupture and repair, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
repair is good. I've certainly had those with clients, and I found even those sessions extremely helpful because they've never had anybody before, maybe in some cases, take their pain seriously and be accountable and
Yes.
apologize and say, you know, this relationship matters, that I'm also willing to do the work to understand you, and I found that to be so healing for some of my clients because they're like, whoa, nobody's ever done that for me. Nobody's ever shown me that I matter enough that they be willing to hear me and, lean in when I'm upset. Usually they just justify, dig in, or go away. Right. So,
Yes. Well, we've been together here for 23 years and we're constantly rupturing and repairing still today, right?
yes.
Um, which
Oh,
strengthens the relationship for sure.
yeah. You and your partner, 23 years. Yeah. So,
Yes.
and we know in EFT that, having conflict or having ruptures is not a signal of relational health, right?
No.
Just because you
Right.
have conflict or ruptures does not mean your relationship is unhealthy,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Beautifully said.
just part of being in relationship together.
Yes.
Yeah. So great, Rob. Well, thank you so much. So I just want to maybe do, if we could do like a Tango Move Fast
Sure.
summary, right?
Yeah.
How would you sort of reflect, what we've covered today?
Well, we discussed. It is going to sound like a Tango Move 5. We discussed in the very beginning, where the terms came from, Bartholomew and John Bowlby, of course, their internal working models, right? He saw them as being flexible and open to revision. And so when our clients come, we hold attachment in our hearts. And we know that even if somebody says, I don't believe that people will change, we can nip that in the bud. We can say, actually, attachment science says that people can change. They just need the right circumstances to change. And so we're going to try to create those right circumstances here in the therapy, whether we're seeing couples, families, or individuals. And then we get to work. And in stage one, we go slow in stage one as we're getting to know our clients. We come alongside of them. We enter the phenomenological world. We see the cast of characters that shaped their model of self and model of other. And we look at their strategies, how they sort of adapted to those missings, let's say, those misattunements. And we want to sort of build that alliance with them so that they continue to explore a little bit more with us, a little bit more with each other in couples therapy. Of course, we use the tango in couples therapy and we try to get at that emotional music that's underneath the harder music. The softer music is what we're going for because we believe if we can change the music, we can change the dance. And
Right.
we get this de-escalation in couples and we start to build this trust with individuals, and then we can slowly move them into this other area, which is deeper emotional processing, using the tango all the time. It's such a gift, Sue's baby, that she gave us, right? This idea of this sequence of moves that we can use to create safety. And then we can go in there and we can get people to sort of talk more about that vulnerable view of self, their fear of sharing that in relationship with others, what happens, what they're thinking about the other, but what they're thinking about themselves, processing that fear in couples therapy so that the longing actually to reach becomes stronger than the fear itself, and they can actually share their vulnerable view of self with the other in couples and in EFIT. We want them to be able to, with us, take us with them into these difficult relationships where they need to have these conversations with others in the therapy, in the privacy of their own minds. And that's what we're doing here. And that's what we talked about.
Yeah, I love that. Scaffolding stage one, helping to identify that part, connecting it back into the reactivity, this pattern, whether it's individual or couples, and sort of creating that attachment narrative, how that lives in the present affects how they show up in the world, how they, the meaning of the triggers and how they get triggered, what they do. And then as we create more safety through connection, through alliance, rapport, that safe haven, secure base with us as the therapist and in the process, and maybe even together with their partner, if they're in couples, then we start shifting over into stage two, and you're saying we open up, we go right into that vulnerable view of self in stage two, and we're going to the heart of it where they're able to access and go to it without all the reactivity and the defenses. Doesn't mean it's not so vulnerable and like scary,
Mm-hmm.
but they're able to access it in a different way where now like the real good juice starts to happen, and we do some healing directly in that place through those antidote experiences, or as Sue calls the corrective emotional experiences.
Yes.
And yeah, so
Perfect.
that's view of self and view of other. Perfect. Well,
Nice Tango 5.
yeah, thank you, Robin. And so where do folks find you if they want to attend a training by you, or maybe have you come do a training in their area?
Wow. Well, they can find me on my I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. If they Google my name, or sort of not Google, but if you go to Facebook and just put my name, Robin Williams Blake, in, you'll see my page come up. My website is robinwilliamsblake.com, and my email is Robin Blake. Sorry, it's actually Robin at robinwilliamsblake.com. So that's how they can find me.
Perfect. And I will make sure to put Robin's website and email address in the description for this video on YouTube. And if you're listening on the podcast, you might just have to rewind it and write it down. But hopefully, you will look up Robin and contact him. And, he's also on social media, on Facebook and I think Instagram, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
you're often posting about your events and training and stuff. And so people can go on there and also see examples of his extraordinary photography. And we're super excited about that. So thank you so much, Robin, for being here with
Thank you.
us and giving us your wisdom. And thank you so much.
Thank you for all you do, Annabelle.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to our visitors, to our subscribers. Make sure you check out my book on Amazon. You can just type in Relentless Empathy, Anabelle Bugatti. It's an easy way to find it, but it is a self of the therapist book on working with challenging and difficult clients in therapy using Sue's term relentless empathy. So make sure you check that out. It's available on Amazon. And if you haven't done so already, guys, make sure that you hit subscribe because more videos are on the way.